Good evening and welcome back once again to Channel 514, where, after a hiatus of some months, we are all set to continue with our series exploring ancient literature. And as promised, this present episode in our series will deal with the early Greek poet Hesiod. In fact, little enough is known about Hesiod, and I think it's fair to say that instead of a clear and consistent and straightforward body of biographical information about the man, we have a legacy of legend and lore about him. We have a tradition of Hesiod. So let's talk about that tradition just a little bit and the way that it's come down to us and come to be understood in the modern age. Well, first of all, we're not sure exactly when Hesiod lived. Scholars will tell you that he lived anywhere from the 9th century BC on down to the 5th. Some like the 9th, some like the 7th, some like the 6th, etc. But more often than not, they'll tell you the 8th. And in fact, that's the case with Homer too. Sometimes they'll tell you the 9th century BC, but more often than not, it's the 8th. So we're just going to go with that for our purposes here. Anyway, it's also very conventional to compare and contrast Homer and Hesiod in a particular way. What I mean is that Homer is traditionally thought of, both by the Greeks of the ancient world and by basically everyone ever since then, as the poet of royal courts, as a man who moved in the circles of chieftains and their thanes, of kings and their courtiers, and who had a very aristocratic sensibility. On the other hand, Hesiod is usually thought of as a peasant poet, as a small farmer who had this gift of poetic song and who lived most of his life within a short, or I should say a small, geographic area. Now, the tradition is that he was from Boeotia, which is a region in central Greece where the ancient city-state of Thebes was located, and where the modern city of Thivi is, of course, still located. Also located in Boeotia was Mount Parnassos, the site of the Panhellenic shrine of Delphi, where the Oracle of Delphi was located, where there was a great temple of Apollo, and where the great Pythian games, dedicated to Apollo, were celebrated. Now, if you've been to Delphi, I've been there once myself, then you'll remember that when you're there on the upper slopes of Parnassos, you can look out and see the upper slopes and the peak of Mount Helicon, which is comparable in size to Parnassos. Now, Mount Helicon was, of course, believed to be sacred to the Muses, the goddesses of the arts and sciences. And Hesiod, it seems, believed that the Muses had given him some sort of special inspiration while he was there on Mount Helicon at some time in his life. So he had a special devotion to the Muses, it seems. And he also seems to have been pretty well known in the circuits of poetic contests that were a fairly regular feature in Greek life in his time, and for many centuries after his time. So anyway, those are the highlights of the legacy of lore about Hesiod that has come down to us. So let's talk about his works a little bit. He has some lost works that deal with heroic mythology. So you could maybe compare these to Ovid's Metamorphoses or Ovid's Heroides, or maybe the Thebaid of Statius, or some of these works, these poetic works by Greek and Roman authors that retell and represent the great myth cycles of classical mythology. So these lost works of Hesiod, they deal with heroic mythology. So what you're going to find in the fragments of these works that survive has to do with your favorite characters, your favorite heroes and antagonists and other characters from classical mythology. So Heracles or Hercules and Theseus, etc. And the names of these works, we have here the Shield, the Catalogue of Women, and then a host of other fragments from other lost works. And this, of course, these are found in a volume from the Loeb Classical Library, published by Harvard University Press. And this, I should say, is volume 2 of their 2 volumes of the works of Hesiod. Now, his other 2 works, which are some of the best known and most beloved works of early Greek literature, are the Theogony and the Works and Days. Now, Theogony, or Theogonia, well, before discussing that, I'll just mention briefly that there is controversy, as is often the case, about whether the same author wrote both of these works. So just as there's some controversy about whether the same Homer wrote the Iliad and the Odyssey, there's some controversy over whether the same Hesiod wrote the Theogony and the Works and Days. But we're just going to assume that he did for our purposes here. Anyway, the Theogony, or Theogonia, oh, I should also mention, this is the Penguin edition of these 2 works, and it's called Hesiod and Theognis. Theognis is another poet whose poems happen to be included in this volume. And it's the 1973 translation by Dorothea Wender, who was a scholar, I forget where Wheaton College, Massachusetts. So she was a classics scholar at Wheaton College, Massachusetts. But anyway, Theogony, or Theogonia, means genealogy or origins or birth of the gods. And, not surprisingly, you'll find in here some stories about the origins and the early adventures of the Olympian gods. So, really, you're probably more familiar with the contents of this work than you might at first realize if you're the sort of person who's aware of Homer but not aware of Hesiod. No, I think that even if the name is strange to you, probably a lot of what you'll find in this poem is not so new to you. Anyway, it begins with the origins of the Olympian gods. And first, well, if you're familiar with these myth cycles at all, then you know that usually the way you read it in books about this stuff is that you had the earth goddess, or the personified earth, and the personified heavens, Gaia and Uranos, respectively, and they have these prodigious children, the Titans, the Cyclopes, the hundred-handed giants, etc. And this generation of beings is then supplanted by the Olympian gods. And after a time, the Olympian gods become frustrated with humankind, which has come into being while all of this was going on. And they decide to eliminate them with a flood. Now, probably the flood story in here is not unrelated to the one in Genesis. I don't think that this represents a purely independent account from the one in Genesis, but anyway. So that happens, and this character Deucalion then survives the flood by, well, how else? By sailing around in an ark, in a boat, and he and his family then repopulate the earth. And maybe you're familiar with that story and how they do it and everything. I won't tell it all in detail here, but then the gods decide to afflict man with a woman named Pandora, and they give her the magic box, and she opens it, and all the sorrows and troubles that afflict humankind come out of the box. And, of course, there's no getting them back in that box after that. So that's where we get that expression, to open a Pandora's box, which is the same as saying to open a can of worms, to let the genie out of the bottle, or let the cat out of the bag, etc. So you find that in the Theogony. And also at the very beginning of the poem, I won't take time to read it here, but Hesiod describes how the Muses inspired him to sing, to compose poetry. And so that's where we get this tradition about him being specially devoted to the Muses. And really it seems to be pretty well borne out in the poems. But anyway, you also have this poem called The Works and Days. And it's really a very charming work. Now, the concept of it is that Hesiod has a brother named Perses, and Perses has just been ruined in his, he's embarked upon a career as a merchant. He's been trading, he's been traveling by sea, etc., and he's come upon hard times, and he's been ruined. So his ship has sunk or something like that, but now he's decided to take up farming and be a peasant like his brother. So Hesiod is going to tell him all about how to live that life. And so he gives you a lot of charming information about the cycle of the year and the constellations and how they move around over the course of the year, and when you should plant and when you should sow and when you should harvest, etc., and how you should watch the skies to know exactly what time of year it is and when the time has come to do this, and when you should start work in the morning. And so you have all of this practical advice about farming and rural life, and not getting into trouble with the nobility and the magistrates, etc., or not getting into too much trouble with women and that sort of thing. And at the same time, you have sapiential sayings about, well, let's give an example of that. And that'll be the only little bit of reading that I get from here. Don't be called too hospitable, nor yet unfriendly. Don't be talked of as too fond of lower-class companions, or as one who likes to pick a fight with noblemen, or a pot unblessed by sacrifice brings harm. Don't ever eat or wash from such a pot. So you have a lot of wisdom sayings, so to speak. Not so to speak, really. That's what you have in many lines of this poem. So Works and Days. It's a wisdom book. It's a treatise on farming. It's an address, sort of an epistolary work, from one loving brother to another, with a little bit of finger wagging from the more prudent brother to the more prodigal brother, who's run up on the rocks and ruined himself and needs to be taught how to put things right, you know. And it's also sort of a beautiful tribute to not only rural life, but to nature and the cycles of the earth and the sky and the sea, etc., and how all these things sort of work together in this beautiful cycle of life, you know. So Works and Days. I think that if you're unfamiliar with Hesiod and his works, and if maybe you don't really feel like reading another work on mythology or something like that, you're kind of all mythologied out maybe, then Works and Days is really something you might find very charming. But anyway, that, I think, is just about all I want to say right now about this particular poet. Now, as we go on with this series, we'll still be in this neighborhood of early Greek literature for at least a few more videos. So next time around, we might talk about lyric poets or about Aesop or what have you. So thanks very much for joining me tonight, and I will be seeing you again sometime soon. And of course, a special greeting and thanks to any new viewers who are just coming across the channel for the first time, or who have recently subscribed, or anything like that. That's much appreciated, and once again, thank you very much, and take care. And I will be seeing you soon.